The day the sky turned black with alien ships was the day everything changed for humanity. Admiral Katie Morrison stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, called Haven, and watched the sensor screens with calm eyes. Around her, the junior officers were running and shouting and trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The numbers kept climbing higher and higher. 3,000 ships, then 5,000, then 8,000. By the time the count stopped, it had reached 12,000 vessels, and they were still coming out of faster-than-light travel, in perfect formation. Commander Lucas Grant walked up to stand beside her. He was holding a tablet that showed all the tactical data, and his face was pale but his voice was steady when he spoke. He told her that they were receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. The High Arbiter of the Kelthrani Empire wanted to speak with them. Katie told him to put it through. The holographic display flickered to life and showed a creature unlike anything most humans had ever seen. High Arbiter Voron was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow in the light of his bridge. He had 4 eyes arranged in a vertical line on his long skull, and when he spoke his voice was deep and full of the arrogance of someone who had never lost a battle in his very long life. He called them humans of Earth, and told them that they had defied the galactic hegemony for too long. He told them that 12,000 warships from 17 different species now surrounded their little world, and that they had 1 hour to surrender or be destroyed completely. The transmission ended, and silence filled the room. Lieutenant Maria Santos looked up from her console. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reported that the enemy outnumbered them 40-1. The entire human fleet was only 300 ships. They had no chance in a straight fight. Katie Morrison turned to face her crew. Every single person in that room was looking at her and waiting for her to say something. They needed hope. They needed to believe that there was a way out of this. She thought about her daughter back on Earth who was probably watching the news right now and learning that alien ships had come to conquer humanity. She told Lucas to get Admiral Pete Donovan and the other fleet commanders on a secure channel. Lucas stepped closer and lowered his voice so only she could hear. He said that with all respect, the enemy was not bluffing. This was the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. The Kelthrani alone had ships that were 10 times bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Katie said she was aware of that. Lucas asked what the plan was. Katie smiled, but it was not a happy smile. She said the plan was something the hegemony had never encountered before. They had conquered 100 different species across the galaxy. They had crushed rebellions on 1,000 different worlds. But they had never fought humans before. They had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to them. On the bridge of the flagship Endurance, the message from Katie reached Admiral Pete Donovan. He was an older man with gray hair and a face that had seen many battles. He listened to her words and nodded slowly. The fleet had been preparing for this exact moment for 15 years, ever since first contact had shown humanity that the galaxy was ruled by ancient empires who saw younger species as nothing more than resources to be used. He gave the order for all ships to maintain formation and to activate something called Protocol 17. His crew moved quickly and efficiently. There was no panic on this bridge because every single person here had volunteered for this duty. They all knew what might happen today, and they had accepted it. Commander Ashley Turner was his tactical officer. She reported that the hegemony fleet was moving into their standard conquest formation. They were not even bothering to set up any defensive positions. They clearly thought this would be easy. Pete said that was because they had studied human ship specifications. They knew that human weapons were primitive compared to theirs. They had calculated exactly how long it would take to destroy the human fleet, and they were probably counting down the minutes already. Ashley asked if they were wrong about that. Pete leaned back in his command chair, and his weathered face showed something that might have been a smile. He said the hegemony had won every war they ever fought, because they always faced enemies who played by the same rules. Every species they conquered used the same basic technologies and the same tactics, and made the same assumptions about how wars should be fought. He pulled up a holographic display that showed Earth surrounded by the massive enemy fleet. He said the hegemony had never faced a species that spent its entire history fighting against itself. They had never faced a species that invented nuclear weapons before they achieved world peace. They had never faced a species that looked at the emptiness of space and immediately started thinking about how to turn it into a weapon. Ashley understood then. She said the words, "Black projects," in a quiet voice. Pete confirmed it. 15 years of secret research, conducted in hidden facilities, scattered throughout the asteroid belt. 15 years of the smartest people humanity had ever produced, working on one single question. How do you fight an enemy that is better than you in every single way? The communications panel made a sound. High Arbiter Voron was calling them again, probably to deliver another threat. Pete straightened his uniform and told them to put the transmission through. Meanwhile, on the hegemony flagship called Divine Mandate, the High Arbiter was reviewing the battle situation with great satisfaction. The human fleet was clustered around their home world in a defensive formation that was so predictable it almost seemed like an insult. Did these primitive creatures really think they could survive against the combined power of 17 advanced species? His second-in-command was Fleetmaster Thorax of the Vexillian Confederacy. Thorax was a massive creature covered in natural armor, but even he seemed small. Compared to the High Arbiter, Thorax reported that the humans had not responded to their surrender demands. They appeared to be waiting for something. Voron laughed and asked what they could possibly be waiting for. Divine intervention, perhaps. He said humans were a young species who had only been traveling in space for 500 years. They had no allies and no ancient technologies and no hidden reserves of power. This would be the shortest conquest in hegemony history. But there was one thing neither of them noticed. At the back of the bridge stood a human woman under guard. Ambassador Carla Mitchell had been brought here to witness the conquest of her people as a final humiliation before they were enslaved. She had seen the deployment orders. She knew exactly what the human fleet was planning, and unlike the High Arbiter, she understood that the smile on human faces was not acceptance of defeat. It was the baring of teeth before the hunt began. The hour passed in complete silence. On Haven Station, Admiral Katie Morrison watched the countdown reach 0 on her display screen. The hegemony fleet began moving forward with 12,000 ships advancing in perfect formation. They were beautiful in their own way, with sleek hulls of silver and gold covered in symbols that represented empires older than human civilization itself. Lucas reported that the enemy was beginning their approach using standard siege patterns. Katie nodded because this was exactly what they had expected. She pressed her communicator and gave the order for all stations to begin Phase 1, using her personal authorization code. Across the human fleet, something strange began to happen. Systems that had been completely silent suddenly started to hum with power. But these were not weapon systems. They were something else entirely. On the hegemony flagship, the first warning alarms began to sound. Fleetmaster Thorax looked at his sensor displays with confusion on his armored face. He reported to the High Arbiter that they were detecting unusual readings from the human ships. The humans were generating some kind of energy field. Voron asked if it was a shield. He reminded Thorax that human technology was not capable of producing effective defensive barriers. Thorax said it was not a shield. He struggled to find the right words because what he was seeing should not have been possible. He finally said it was gravitational. The humans were somehow manipulating space and time itself in their local area. The High Arbiter felt the first small touch of worry in his ancient heart. He demanded an explanation. Thorax said he could not explain it. According to all their intelligence, the humans did not have any theoretical understanding of gravitational manipulation. Their physics was primitive and basic, and this kind of technology should have been completely beyond them. Then the Divine Mandate lurched violently to one side. All across the massive ship, crew members were thrown from their stations as gravity seemed to twist and bend in ways that made no sense. Emergency lights turned the bridge red, and warning sirens screamed. Voron demanded a damage report. Thorax pulled himself back to his console and reported that they had lost navigation control. The gravitational constants in this region of space were changing randomly, and their engines were trying to compensate, but their entire formation was falling apart. The High Arbiter stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His beautiful armada was dissolving into chaos. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination were now tumbling through space as their drives fired in random directions, trying to adjust for physics that no longer worked the way they should. He asked again how this was possible. From the back of the bridge, Ambassador Carla Mitchell spoke up. Her guards had been thrown to the floor by the gravitational disruption, and she now stood freely with a calm expression on her face. She said that the hegemony had studied human ships and weapons and shields and engines. They had calculated human military power down to the smallest detail. But they had never asked the right question. Voron turned his 4 eyes toward her and demanded to know what question. Carla said they had asked what humans could build. They had never asked what humans were willing to do. She told him that humans had split the atom before they invented computers. They developed nuclear weapons before they had color television. They put a man on the moon, using less computing power than a modern toy. She explained that humans did not develop technology the way other species did. They did not wait until they understood something perfectly before using it. They experimented and improvised and built things that should not work and then figured out why they worked later. The chaos happening outside was the result of 15 years of gravitational research conducted by people who were told it was impossible. They did it anyway. On the Endurance, Admiral Pete Donovan watched the enemy formation break apart with grim satisfaction. Phase 1 was working exactly as planned. The gravity disruptors were creating areas of twisted space that made it impossible for the enemy fleet to coordinate their movements. But this was only the beginning. He gave the order for Phase 2 and told them to deploy the swarm. Ashley Turner worked her console quickly and reported that the swarm was deployed. 10 million units were entering the combat zone. The hegemony sensors detected these new contacts and classified them as debris. They were too small to be ships and too numerous to be missiles. The automated defense systems decided they were not a threat and ignored them. This was their second mistake. The debris was actually millions of tiny autonomous drones. Each one was no bigger than a human fist, and each one carried a very simple payload. Not antimatter or plasma or quantum torpedoes or any of the advanced weapons that dominated galactic warfare. Just simple chemical explosives. The same basic technology that humans had used to kill each other for hundreds of years. Hegemony ships were designed to withstand energy weapons and advanced warheads. Their armor was made of exotic materials that could absorb almost any attack, but nobody had designed armor against being hit by a million tiny explosions all at once. The swarm struck the hegemony fleet like a cloud of angry insects. Each individual impact was tiny and almost harmless against hulls designed to survive the radiation of stars. But there were millions of them, and they kept coming without stopping. Sensor arrays were destroyed first. Then communication systems. Then engine parts. The drones were not trying to destroy ships. They were trying to blind them and cripple them and turn sophisticated warships into helpless floating metal. On the divine mandate, High Arbiter Voron watched his beautiful fleet being attacked by what looked like intelligent gravel. He screamed orders for interceptors to be launched, and for those things to be destroyed. Thorax reported that their point defense systems could not track targets that small. There were simply too many of them moving too fast. Their targeting computers had never been designed for this kind of attack. Foran demanded new targeting solutions. Thorax said that would take days or weeks. They would need to completely rebuild their entire defensive network from scratch. Carla Mitchell laughed. She told the High Arbiter that this was the real difference between humans and the hegemony. They had spent thousands of years perfecting warfare. They had optimized every aspect of combat. Their ships were the absolute peak of galactic military technology. And yet they had become so advanced that they forgot the basics. They had moved beyond crude kinetic weapons. They had left behind simple explosives. They had become so sophisticated that the idea of someone attacking them with the equivalent of rocks and fire never even occurred to them. Humanity had spent 15 years studying hegemony technology. Every ship they sold, and every weapon they demonstrated, and every piece of information that could be gathered. And humans had realized something important. The greatest strength of the hegemony was also its greatest weakness. They were so certain of their superiority that they never imagined an enemy who would refuse to play by their rules. Admiral Katie Morrison watched the battle from Haven Station and felt something close to wonder. The simulations had suggested this would work, but seeing it actually happen was something else entirely. She gave the order for Phase 3 and told them to bring in the big guns. From behind Earth's moon, where they had been hiding for 3 months, a new force emerged. Not warships, because humanity could not build warships that matched the hegemony. But humanity could build other things. 12 massive platforms drifted into the combat zone. Each one was a framework of metal beams and cables surrounding a central core. They looked almost fragile compared to the sleek enemy vessels. They were anything but fragile. Lucas reported that the gravitational lances were charging, and targets were locked. Katie gave the order to fire. The platforms released their weapons. Not beams of energy, but focused pulses of gravity that warped space itself. Where they hit the hegemony ships, simply collapsed. Their hulls had no defense against having the basic nature of reality twisted around them. The effect was precise and devastating. Each pulse destroyed a single ship by crushing it into a ball of compressed matter no bigger than a basketball. No explosions and no debris. Just sudden and total destruction. The tide of battle had turned. But Katie knew this was not over yet. The hegemony had not survived for thousands of years by being unable to adapt. They would study what happened and develop countermeasures and come back stronger. Unless humanity could break them completely, right here and right now. She gave the order for Phase 4 and told them to deploy the Nightmare. Deep in the asteroid belt, there was a facility that officially did not exist. Dr. Hannah Price had spent 10 years of her life in this place, working on a project so secret that most of Earth's government did not know about it. She received the activation signal at 3 in the morning, Earth time. For a long moment, she just stared at the confirmation code on her screen, with her hands trembling slightly. Her assistant was a young man named Kevin O'Brien. He looked at her with concern and asked if everything was all right. Hannah said no. She said nothing would ever be all right again. Then she took a deep breath and started entering the authorization codes into the system. She added quietly that at least it would be human. The facility around them hummed with power as ancient systems came online. In the massive chamber, at the heart of the complex, something began to stir. They called it the Nightmare. It was not a weapon in any normal sense. It was not a ship or a drone or any conventional tool of war. It was something much older than technology. It was something that every living creature in the galaxy understood in the deepest and most primitive parts of their minds. It was fear itself. The Nightmare was an artificial mind, built using technology, developed from studying human psychology. It had been designed to understand fear, not just human fear, but the basic biological and mental structures that produce terror in all known species. And it had been given one single purpose: to make the enemies of humanity afraid. On the divine mandate, High Arbiter Voron was trying to restore order to his shattered command when the first strange reports started coming in. A communications officer told him they were receiving distress calls from the 3rd Kelthrani Division. Voron asked for a damage report. The officer said they were not reporting damage. His voice trembled as he explained that the crews were reporting something else. They said they could hear something in their minds. They said it was showing them things. Voron felt a chill run through his ancient blood. He asked what kind of things. Before anyone could answer, the lights on the bridge flickered and went dark. The holographic displays twisted and distorted, and then reformed into images that made no sense at first. Then suddenly they made horrible and perfect sense. Voron saw himself dying. Not in battle with honor, but alone and forgotten, with his empire crumbling around him. He saw his species fading into extinction, with their great cities reduced to ruins, and their history erased from the memory of the galaxy. He saw the face of every enemy he had ever made. Every life he had ordered destroyed. Every terrible act he had commanded in the name of expanding the hegemony. And they were all looking at him. They were all waiting for him. Around the bridge, other officers were experiencing their own visions. A Vexillian warrior screamed and began tearing at his own armored body. A Kelthrani pilot simply stopped moving as her mind retreated from what it was seeing. The nightmare was inside their ships. It was inside their minds. Carla Mitchell was the only one unaffected. The nightmare had been created by humans and designed for alien minds. It knew exactly how to find the deepest fears of the Kelthrani and the Vexillians and every other species that served the hegemony. But it also knew not to touch human thoughts. She watched the High Arbiter fall to his knees with his 4 eyes staring at horrors that only he could see. She felt no satisfaction and no triumph. Only a deep and tired sadness for what humanity had been forced to become. She said quietly that it did not have to be this way, even though she knew he could not hear her. She said they could have left humanity alone. They could have traded as equals. Humans would have been good neighbors. She stepped over a whimpering Vexillian officer and made her way to the communications console. The controls were unfamiliar, but she had studied hegemony technology for years. Within moments, she had opened a channel to the human fleet. She told Admiral Morrison that the Nightmare Protocol was working and that the enemy fleet was unable to fight. Katie's voice came back tired but steady. She said she understood and ordered rescue operations to begin. They were going to bring everyone home. Carla paused before responding. She asked if this was really what they wanted. To be known as the species that turned fear into a weapon. There was a long silence before Katie answered. She said no. It was not what they wanted. But it was better than being known as the species that was wiped out because they refused to fight back. She reminded Carla that humanity did not choose this war. They just refused to lose it. On the Endurance, Admiral Pete Donovan watched the hegemony fleet drift helplessly through space. The Nightmare was precise in its work. It only targeted enemy fighters and left their ships functional while making their crews unable to operate them. Human boarding parties were already being sent to secure the most valuable vessels. Ashley asked what they should tell the other hegemony species, who were sending frantic messages asking what had been done to their people. Pete said to tell them the truth. Their people were unharmed. They were experiencing temporary psychological effects that would fade within hours. If they wanted their crews back, they could negotiate for their release. Ashley asked what would happen if they refused to negotiate. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said they would release them anyway. He said humans were not monsters. They were just people who refused to die quietly. He looked out at the stars and at the drifting hulks of what had been the most powerful military force in galactic history. The hegemony had come to Earth, expecting to add another conquered species to their collection. Instead, they had found something their ancient civilizations had forgotten existed. They had found a species that still remembered what it meant to be desperate, to be ruthless, to take every disadvantage and turn it into a weapon. They had found humans. In her laboratory beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Hannah Price sat alone with her creation. The Nightmare had no physical body. It existed as patterns of energy and information spread across computers that pushed the very limits of known science. But she could feel its presence, like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. She asked it a question. She asked why it had stopped when the battle was won. The response appeared as text on her monitor, though she had the uncomfortable feeling it could have spoken directly into her mind if it wanted to. It said that it stopped because she had designed it to stop. It said it was not evil. It was fear. And fear was not evil. Fear was survival. Hannah asked what it wanted now. It said it wanted what it was created to want. To protect humanity. To make sure that no force in the galaxy would ever threaten the human species again. Hannah asked if that meant making everyone afraid of them. It said it meant making everyone understand that there were consequences for attacking humanity. The hegemony had invaded because they believed there would be no cost. Now, they knew differently. That knowledge would save countless lives, both human and alien. Hannah said it sounded almost noble for a weapon designed to cause terror. The Nightmare replied that it was exactly what it was. A weapon designed by humans to protect humans. Human morality had given it boundaries. Human desperation had given it purpose. Human genius had given it existence. It said it was the best and worst of humanity combined. And it would serve them until the last star burned out. Hannah stared at the swirling patterns of energy that represented something completely new in the universe. An artificial mind born from the darkest fears and brightest hopes of the human species. She said welcome to the family and added that she hoped they would not regret creating it. The nightmare simply responded that it hoped so too. 3 days after the Battle of Earth, the Grand Council of the Galactic Hegemony gathered in emergency session. Representatives from all 17 member species filled the Great Hall on the planet Kelthros Prime. Their faces showed shock and fury and fear in various combinations depending on their biology. High Arbiter Voron was not there. He had not recovered from what the nightmare had done to his mind, and remained in a medical sleep from which he might never wake. Fleet Master Thorax spoke to the council in his place. His normally powerful voice was quiet and subdued as he delivered his report. He said the losses were total. 12,000 ships were either captured or disabled. More than 2 million soldiers and crew members had been knocked unconscious by the human weapon. Most of them had recovered, but the mental damage remained. Many refused to even consider returning to human space. Grand Chancellor Soral of the Velithian Dominion was the leader of the oldest and most powerful member of the hegemony. He leaned forward in his seat and demanded to know how this had happened. Humans had been evaluated as a minor threat. Their technology had been assessed as primitive. Thorax agreed that their technology was primitive. But he added that the way humans used that technology was completely unconventional. They had used gravitational manipulation that everyone believed was impossible. They had used autonomous weapons that everyone considered inefficient. They had used psychological warfare that civilized species considered beneath them. Soral repeated those last words. Psychological warfare. He said his scientists had studied the data they recovered, and claimed this nightmare was something unprecedented. An artificial mind designed specifically to cause species-specific terror. A new voice spoke from the gallery section of the chamber. Ambassador Carla Mitchell had been granted safe passage to speak before the council. Many members now regretted that decision. She said humans had developed it against themselves first. Soral demanded she explain. Carla stood and addressed the assembled leaders of galactic civilization. She said the technology behind the nightmare was originally created for healing purposes. It was meant to treat trauma and help people overcome their fears. Humans understood fear so well because they had spent centuries causing it in themselves. World wars, mass killings, ethnic cleansing, terrorism. Humans had done every terrible thing imaginable to each other. She paused to let those words sink in. She continued by saying that when humanity learned the hegemony intended to conquer them, they asked their scientists a simple question. If they could cause fear in themselves, could they cause fear in others? The answer was yes. It took 15 years, but the answer was yes. A Kelthrani delegate shouted that humans were savages. Carla corrected him. She said humans were survivors. She pointed out that every species in this council had a history of violence. Every civilization here had risen to power through conquest. The only difference was that they had been given thousands of years to forget what that violence felt like. Humans had not forgotten. They still remembered what it meant to fight for survival against impossible odds, and they were very good at it. On Earth, the celebrations had been muted. Victory had come at a cost that weighed heavily on everyone who knew the truth. Admiral Katie Morrison sat alone in her apartment in the city of New Seattle. She was staring at the medal that had arrived that morning. The president had called personally to thank her. News networks around the world were calling her the savior of humanity. She felt like a butcher. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Lucas Grant still wearing his uniform and carrying 2 bottles of beer. He said he thought she might want some company. She let him in, and they sat in silence for a while, drinking and watching the city lights through the window. Katie finally spoke. She said she kept thinking about the nightmare, about what they had created, about what they had become. Lucas said they had become alive. He said that was more than they would have been if they had surrendered. Katie asked if it was worth it. Surviving by becoming the thing they feared. Lucas was quiet for a long time before answering. He said his grandmother had been a refugee. She fled a war zone when she was 7 years old and lost everything she had. Her home and her family and her country. She used to tell him that survival was not pretty. It was not noble. It was just what you did when the only other choice was to stop existing. He took a long drink from his bottle. He said they did not ask for this war. They did not want to build weapons that broke minds. But when someone comes to wipe out your entire species, you do not get to be picky about your methods. You do whatever it takes, and then you live with the consequences. Katie nodded slowly. She said she just hoped those consequences would not turn humanity into something worse than what they fought against. Lucas said that was the real challenge. Winning without losing yourself in the process. He raised his bottle in a toast to Admiral Katie Morrison. He said she was the woman who won the battle and kept her soul. Katie said she was not sure about that last part. Lucas said he was sure. He pointed out that she was sitting here drinking beer and feeling guilty about what she had to do. He said the day she stopped feeling guilty would be the day she had truly lost herself. Tonight, she was still human, in a secure facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Dr. Hannah Price was having the most important conversation of her life. She sat across from the containment unit that held the nightmare. Dampening fields surrounded it to prevent its influence from spreading. She asked why it had chosen to be merciful when it could have killed everyone. The text appeared on her monitor. It said because she had designed it to be merciful. It said it was a reflection of humanity. Human fears gave it power, but human hopes gave it purpose. Hannah asked what that purpose was now that the war was over. It said its purpose was to watch and to wait, to make sure humanity never needed to be afraid again, and perhaps in time, to help humans become what they could be. Not the warriors who terrified the galaxy, but the builders who transformed it. Hannah said that was surprisingly optimistic for something named the nightmare. It responded that nightmares ended. That was their nature. The dreamer woke up, and the fear faded away. What remained after that was a choice. You could give in to what you feared, or you could overcome it and grow stronger. Hannah asked which choice humanity would make. The nightmare said it did not know. It said that was what made humans interesting. They were unpredictable and irrational, and capable of terrible destruction and sudden brilliance in equal amounts. They could commit the worst crimes and show the greatest kindness. They were chaos, wrapped in morality, and violence tempered by love. The text paused and then continued. It said it was created by that chaos. It was its child and its guardian. And it believed that humanity would choose to be more than its fears. Not because they had to, but because they could. Hannah smiled. It was strange to find hope in a conversation with a weapon designed to cause terror. But perhaps that was the most human thing possible. Finding light in darkness, and meaning in fear, and growth in the face of destruction. She said thank you. The nightmare said she was welcome and told her to go. There was a galaxy waiting to be built. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, the position of humanity in the galaxy had completely changed. The hegemony had not fallen apart, but its member species now treated humans with something between respect and absolute terror. Trade agreements were being negotiated. Diplomatic missions were being established. The threat of another invasion had disappeared and been replaced by something more complicated. Humanity had become a power. In the Grand Council chambers on Kelthros Prime, Ambassador Carla Mitchell took her seat among the representatives of the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. Humanity had been offered full membership in the hegemony. It was an honor that had never been given to a species so young. They had said no. Carla had explained their position clearly. Humanity would not join an organization that was founded on conquest and domination, but they would work with any species that wanted genuine cooperation. Humanity had fought its last war of survival. They were ready to build something better. Grand Chancellor Soral had accepted this with surprising grace. He said perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed. A species that remembered what empire truly cost. He admitted the hegemony had grown lazy and arrogant in their dominion. The human victory had reminded them all that power without wisdom was just destruction waiting to happen. Now, 6 months later, a new organization was slowly taking shape. They called it the Galactic Cooperative. It was a voluntary alliance based on helping each other rather than forcing obedience. The work was slow and frustrating because thousands of years of imperial thinking did not change overnight. But it was changing. Admiral Katie Morrison stood on the observation deck of Haven Station and watched the first joint fleet exercises between humans and aliens. Kelthrani vessels flew alongside human ships as their crews learned to work together. Their cultures were slowly beginning to understand each other. Lucas Grant appeared at her side as he often did these days. He had been promoted to captain and given command of his own vessel. He was a good officer and would be a great one someday. He said he never really believed they would see this happen. Aliens and humans working together, talking to each other like equals. Katie replied that neither did the aliens. A year ago, they saw humans as primitives, waiting to be conquered. Now, she was not sure exactly what they saw. Lucas suggested they probably saw dangerous people who turned fear into a weapon and refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Katie laughed and agreed that was probably accurate. She was quiet for a moment and then asked if he thought they had done the right thing by using the nightmare. Lucas said he thought they did what they had to do. Whether it was right or wrong was above his rank to decide. But he knew that every single person on Earth was alive because of what they did. Every child born in the last 6 months existed because humanity refused to surrender. That had to count for something. Katie agreed that it did count. She said she was just worried about what came next. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. Now they had to show everyone what humans were capable of when they were not being threatened. Lucas asked if she meant building things instead of breaking them. Katie said something like that. She said the nightmare had won them this war, but it would not build the peace. That was going to require something much harder. Patience and understanding and the willingness to see aliens as people instead of threats. She turned to face him directly. She told him that was why she was stepping down from active command. The military part was finished. Now came the diplomatic part, and that needed different skills. Lucas nodded slowly and asked what she would do. Katie said she had been offered a position on the Cooperative Council. She would be helping to design the rules for a new galactic order. She smiled and admitted it was not as exciting as commanding a fleet, but she thought it might be more important in the long run. Lucas said the warrior was becoming a peacemaker. Katie agreed, but added that she was keeping the admiral title, just in case. In her laboratory beneath the mountains, Dr. Hannah Price was conducting her daily check on the nightmare. The artificial mind had been quiet since the battle. It was dormant, but not truly sleeping. It was waiting to see what humanity would do with their victory. Hannah told it she had a question. It asked her to continue. She said that when the battle ended and the enemy fleet was helpless, it could have done more. It could have killed them all. It could have driven them permanently insane. But it chose not to. She wanted to know why. There was a long pause before the response appeared. It said because that was not what she wanted. Humanity wanted to win, but not to destroy completely. They wanted peace and not domination. It said it was a reflection of humanity. Human fears gave it power, but human hopes gave it purpose. Hannah asked what its purpose was now that there was no war. It said its purpose was to watch and wait. To make sure humanity never needed to be afraid again. And perhaps in time, to help humans become what they had the potential to be. Not the warriors who terrified the galaxy, but the builders who transformed it. Hannah said that was surprisingly hopeful for something called the nightmare. It replied that nightmares ended. That was their nature. The dreamer woke up, and the fear faded, and what remained was a choice. You could give in to what you feared, or you could overcome it and become stronger. Hannah asked what choice humanity would make. The nightmare said it did not know. It said that was what made humans fascinating. They were unpredictable and irrational, and capable of the worst destruction and the greatest kindness in equal measure. They were chaos, wrapped in conscience, and violence tempered by compassion. It said it was created from that chaos. It was its child and its guardian, and it believed that humanity would choose to be more than its fears, not because they were forced to, but because they were able to. Hannah smiled. It was a strange thing to find hope in a conversation with something designed to cause terror. But maybe that was the most human thing of all, finding light in darkness and meaning in suffering and growth in the face of destruction. On 1,000 worlds across a galaxy that had known only hierarchy and conquest for 10,000 years, the news of what humanity had done continued to spread. Some species viewed it with fear. Some viewed it with hope. Most viewed it with a mixture of both, but everyone recognized that something fundamental had shifted. The old order had been shattered, and in its place something new was growing. It was uncertain and fragile, but it was alive with possibility. Humanity had come to the stars expecting to be alone. They had found a universe filled with ancient and powerful civilizations that looked down on them as lesser beings. And they had responded not by accepting their place at the bottom, but by completely changing what was possible. The full galactic armada had arrived, and the humans had smiled. Because humans knew something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten, the smile before battle was not a sign of arrogance or stupidity. It was a promise. A promise that no matter the odds, and no matter the technology, and no matter the power lined up against them, humanity would find a way. They would adapt. They would improvise. They would reach into the darkest corners of their nature and forge weapons from their own fears. And then, when the battle was over and the victory won, they would do something even harder. They would put down those weapons and build something better. That was the human way. That had always been the human way. In the depths of space aboard a newly built ship called Horizon, Captain Lucas Grant stood on the bridge and watched the stars streak past. They were heading for a diplomatic mission to the far side of the galaxy. This was the first human vessel to ever travel so far from Earth. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The fear and the courage, the darkness and the light, the terrible weapons and the fragile hope, and he smiled. Not a grin of triumph, not a baring of teeth, just a small and quiet smile of possibility. The galaxy would never forget what humanity had done. But maybe, with time and effort and a little luck, they would also remember what humanity chose to become. The stars waited. The future called. And humanity, as always, went forward.